Howdy, partners. Welcome back to Rob's Game Group. I am Rob, and I'm starting a new series of videos today that deal with the Palladium Fantasy role-playing game, second edition specifically. You guys know that I love Palladium games. I love Palladium book products. They have some amazing fluff in their products. And what this series of videos is going to be about is taking some of the key concepts of playing Palladium Fantasy and breaking them down into small chunks to make them more accessible to new players. I've said before I love Palladium Fantasy because it feels old school. Well, it feels old school because it is old school. It's been around for a long time. It was their answer to D&D back in the day. And I do enjoy the system. I will say that the book can be a little bit intimidating. I mean, just the core book alone, 336 pages. And it can seem like a lot to go through. The reality of the situation is that it's not really that much. The core concepts of how to play the game are pretty simple. There's a lot of fluff and there's a lot of explanation and a lot of, well, just a lot of words from Kevin in here on the game itself. And you don't have to know it all going in. So what I'm doing here is, because if you take pretty much any fantasy role-playing game and you're introducing somebody new to it, I find that the three core concepts that people want to know about any fantasy role-playing game is, number one, how does combat work? Number two, how does skills work? And number three, how does magic work? So I've got this series of videos that I'm doing that I'm going to go over all of that, and I'm going to break it down into small chunks to make it easy to explain, and then you can expand on it from there. And what I'm going to cover is primarily, like I said, just stuff from this book. They do have lots of other source books that add on to this, fluff-wise and lore-wise, and more classes for you to play and types of magic and all. But for the purposes of these videos, I'm going to be sticking with just the core book. So before we get into that, if you like these types of videos that I do, the unboxing, the game theory, the rambling for 20-30 minutes, then please subscribe, hit the notification button, and even more importantly, give it a thumbs up. That helps the video to circulate. Also, if you would like to interact with me or my players more, you can find us on Facebook at Rob's Game Group, all one word. Just join us there. You can message me. I've started doing videos where I answer questions that are sent to me. So getting back into today's topic, we're going to start with combat. How do you do combat in Palladium Fantasy? The role-playing part is easy. You role-play, you get your characters into certain situations, and then eventually something happens that leads to a fight. And when that fight occurs, you switch to combat mode. So when you switch to combat mode, it goes out of what we consider a narrative time into rounds of combat time. Excuse me. And a round in Palladium Fantasy is about 15 seconds. So before we go into the actual mechanics of a round of combat, you should know that this is not like the D&D 5th edition that a lot of people play today. You have, depending on your hand-to-hand that you take, your skills, things like that, you will have varying numbers of attacks or actions that you can take during a combat round. And you might have 2 actions, you might have 4 actions, you might have 6 or 8 actions. It just depends on what you've taken, what level you are, so on and so forth. So, when a combat round starts and I'm going around the table, and I start with the highest player because we roll for initiative, but when I start with the first person in initiative, let's say they have 5 actions they can take. Well, they take a action, and then I go to the next highest person in initiative. They take a action, and then the next highest person, they take a action. You see where this is going. When we finish everybody's first action, then we go back to the highest initiative again, and if they have any actions left, they take an action. If we go to the next person, then they have an action left. They take an action. You keep doing this and people whittle down their actions, which does mean that some people will have more actions in a combat round than other people. It's one of the reasons that like juicers from Rifts are so nasty, because they can dodge for free, which doesn't eat up their actions. I believe. It's been a long time since I played the Rifts version. But and granted, we are talking about Palladium Fantasy, but what I'm talking about here pretty much translates through most of the Palladium games. They all kind of use the same system. So in order to help me teach combat to new players, because I'm kind of building a starter set that I'm going to use to introduce people to the world of Palladium. And part of that is going to be using cheat sheets that I make to handle the rules very lightly and give them an idea of how everything works, pre-generated characters, and a pre-generated story for them to play through. And then if they enjoy that, then we can move on to teaching them character creation and so on and so forth. Again, none of the stuff in Palladium is hard. However, it's not really complex. There's just a lot to it. But once you've done it a few times, you realize it's not hard. It's actually pretty easy. So, starting with my cheat sheet here, Fantasy Combat Basics for Palladium. Our first step is we're going to roll initiative, which is simple. Everybody at the table rolls a d20. You include any modifier to initiative that you might have from skills or hand-to-hand or whatever. And high roll goes first, and you go down the line from the highest to the next highest to the next highest. And that's how initiative works, which is pretty standard. A lot of games work like that. Step 2 is the attack rolls. Attack rolls are not standard. They are a little different than you're used to with like D&D or Savage Worlds. So, step 2, the attacker rolls to strike, which is a d20 roll plus their strike bonus, which will already be factored up and on your character sheet. And your strike bonus comes from, again, skills, your level of hand-to-hand that your character took, so on and so forth. But you might have a +5 to strike. So regardless of whether you're striking with your bow or you're striking with your sword, you roll your strike bonus for whatever weapon you're using and a d20, or you roll a d20 and add your strike bonus from whatever weapon you're using. And then we find out whether it hit or missed. So if it is a 4 or less, it's just a miss. Okay? If it's a 5 or higher, it's a hit. But we have to pause right there. Because if you get a 5 or higher, the opponent then has the chance to either take the hit, they could parry, they could dodge, and if they choose to do one of those, they could do entangle too, but we're not going to get into entangle right here. Just parry and dodge are your main ones. But they can choose to parry or dodge, and if they choose to do so, they do so now. So if they choose to parry, which you'll find on page 43 of the rule book, they roll a d20, and they must meet or beat the attack roll. Their d20 is, they might also have a bonus to it from their skills in hand-to-hand for parry, or their weapon might give them a bonus to parry. But they add that to a d20 roll, and they have to meet or beat the attack roll. It is a free action. as long as the defender has some version of hand-to-hand. Otherwise, it costs an action. So if you have two actions, and you're on the first action of the game, or first action of the round, and you get hit by one of the bad guys, you can choose to parry. And also keep in mind, you can only parry things you could actually parry. If you're just in a fist fight, you can parry with your hands. If your opponent has a weapon, then you need to have a weapon to parry with. You cannot parry ranged attacks because you're not superheroes. So anyway, they have to roll a d20, meet or beat the attack roll. It is a free action as long as they have some version of hand-to-hand. If they don't have a version of hand-to-hand, then they have to give up one of their actions that turn to actually parry. So if they had two actions, they just went down to one. This is a good reason to always have some version of hand-to-hand. Dodge, also on page 43. Same thing. They would roll a d20, add any bonus they have to dodge. They must meet or beat the attack roll. However, dodge uses one action each time they use it. So if they, for some reason, don't have a weapon and they're being attacked by a weapon, they can't parry, so they have to dodge. Or if they're getting hit with a ranged attack, they'll have to dodge. Dodge is going to eat up an action. Dodging is great, gets you out of the way of the attack if you roll high. However, every time you dodge, it eats up an action, so if you're constantly dodging, you're not going to be doing a whole lot of fighting back because you're going to burn up all your actions trying to dodge. So, what happens if you parried, if you rolled high enough and you parried the attack, you don't get hit. So that stops the hit right there. If you dodge, you don't get hit. So that stops the hit right there. But if you failed the parry or the dodge, you are hit. So remember, we went 4 or less as a miss, 5 or higher as a hit, but we stopped there so they could parry or dodge. If they failed the parry or dodge, whichever one they chose to do, then the target is hit. If the target has no armor on, then they are clearly trying to commit suicide. The damage will go straight through to their SDC, their structural damage capacity, and then their hit points. If the target has armor on, the attack roll has to beat the armor rating of the for the damage to go through. Meaning that each type of armor is going to provide an armor rating. Let's say it's 13 or 14. That means that the attack roll has to be higher than that. If it was a 14, it would have to be a 15. If it's higher than that, then you found a weak spot in that armor, and your damage goes through to the body of the person, the SDC and the hit points. If it is not harder than that, then the damage comes off of the armor instead, and it doesn't bleed over. This is cool, and one of the things I like about this as opposed to D&D is your armor has its own SDC, its own hit points basically, its own structural damage capacity. So damage that goes to the armor is subtracted from the SDC of the armor, and it can wear down the armor over time, giving you reasons to have the armor repaired or have to replace the armor, because once it's out of SDC, that suit of armor is no good anymore. So let's look at you. If the attack fails, we determine whether it hits the person or the armor. And once we've determined that, then the attacker rolls damage. You roll the damage dice for the weapon, plus any damage bonus you have from hand-to-hand, combat skills, physical strength, magic, etc. If you roll a natural 20, it's a critical strike doing double damage. And then you've determined, okay, I've hit, they failed their parry, I got through their armor, and I rolled damage and I did 15 points of damage. Well, now the defender has one more attempt to negate some of this, and they have an attempt to roll with the impact, or punch, whatever. If it is a physical attack, they can roll a d20 plus any bonus they have to roll with impact, and they have to meet or beat the attack roll, and if they do, then they take half damage. Otherwise, they take full damage. But rolling with the impact does use an action. So if they don't have any actions left, they can't roll with the impact. Or maybe they only have one action left and they want to save that action in case they need to dodge. However, damage will come off SDC first, whether it's armor or person. And if it's coming off the person, once the SDC is gone from the person, then it'll come off of hit points. And so that's everything about it. And it seems like a lot, but you may go back and watch this a couple of times just to get, it's not really a lot. I just kind of broke it down into small steps so you could take it step by step by step and really do combat and understand combat. And then we go to the third panel where I get to introduce Bob the Fighter, and this is Bob the Fighter's armor. So if the attack gets past the parry and the dodge, and you check to see if the armor beats the AR of the armor, because all armor has an armor rating. If it does not beat the AR of the armor, then the damage goes to the SDC of the armor. The armor takes the whole hit. If it does beat the AR, the damage goes through, like I said, you found a weak spot in the armor, straight to the SDC and then hit points on the target's body. When the armor has no SDC left, it is useless and provides 0 AR. When the target has no hit points left, the target is dead. There's none of this death rolls and saves, and there's none of this, negative hit points. When you run out of hit points, you are dead. So, using Bob the Fighter to illustrate in this example, let's look at his armor here. If we're doing the attack roll, if we get a 1 to 4, it's a miss. Okay? It's that simple. This armor he's wearing, and I'm just using this as an example. Let's say it has an AR of 13, and it has 50 SDC. So 1 to 4 is a miss. A 5 to a 13, which is what his AR is, hits, but it only hits the armor. Meaning when you roll damage, it's going to come off of the armor. If you got a 14 or higher, it hits the body. You found a weak spot in the armor, and it hits the body of the target. Meaning it takes damage off of his SDC first. Once his SDC is gone, then it takes points off of his hit points. Once his hit points are gone, Bob is pushing up daisies. That is combat in a nutshell in Palladium. Again, it seems like a whole lot, and then the book's really big and everything, but if you look at what I've done here, I've taken 3 index cards and included, one of them is basically just an example, but I've taken 2 index cards mainly and just broken down the combat round with an attack to show what happens. It's not as simple as when you look at D&D and it's like, okay, well, I have this arbitrary number provided by their armor, and all I have to do is hit that number, and then I hit them. That's probably a little faster, but I really like the fact that the armor offers you a protection, and once you've used up the points off of that armor is no good. So you either have to repair or replace the armor, because armor should wear out over time if it's constantly getting beat on or hit by monsters. So I like the fact that this breaks everything down to, we go from initiative to the attack roll. What happens with the attack roll? Did we miss? Did we hit? Okay, we hit. Now they have a chance to parry and dodge. Okay, they parried or they dodged. Nothing happens. The attack stops right there. We're done. They didn't parry or dodge. Okay, so now we have to look and see, is it going to beat the AR of the armor? If it does, then we roll damage. That goes to the target. If it doesn't, then we roll damage and it goes to the armor. The defender will get one more chance to roll and take half damage, roll with the impact, if they have an action available to do it. That's the key thing. You have to have an action available to roll with impact, you have to have an action available to dodge. You can parry as long as it's a physical attack and you're being attacked like hand to hand with swords, clubs, whatever. So parry is great in the circumstances that you can use it. But that is a breakdown of how combat works. It's actually very simple, and if you go through and make yourself a little cheat sheet like this, it will make things a lot easier when you start playing Palladium to go through the rounds of combat. And once you do it, once you do 2 or 3 rounds of combat, you'll have it down. It's very, very simple. It looks like a lot, like I said, but it's not. So that is the basics of combat in Palladium Fantasy. There are things that can get more intricate, more books that they put out, introduce new hand-to-hand styles that you can add, new skills. I think everybody who plays this game always takes boxing, because boxing gives you some incredible bonuses at character creation. However, we're not going to get into all of that. My purpose in these videos is just to give you a taste and a basic concept of how each of these things works in the game. But with just this little bit right here, you could run full rounds of combat and a full battle, provided there's no magic. We'll get to magic in another video. That's all I have for this week on this. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it informative. Feel free to bookmark it. Come back and use it when you go to play Palladium Fantasy to run through the basics again. Like I said, it can get more intricate with adding other stuff into it, but I'm just using the basic combat out of here, out of the main book. And again, I hope you found it useful. Until next week, good gaming and good luck.